Somebody asked me about global sequences. That gave me an idea. Let's open a rabbit and inject this rabbit with some global sequences, and this will be really educational. So we're going to put a box in the sky next to the rabbit. See, now it's a rabbit with a box. Looks great, you know? He's a rabbit and he's got a box. Now we're going to animate the box. So in order to do that, we're going to put a bone in the middle of that box right there, and then we're just going to select that guy up and hit Control W, which is like a linkage function, right? It links the bone. We might also want to just auto-center the bone at the center of the box. So now I have this bone, right? And we know, like, this is the rabbit's walk animation. So I could, like, animate this bone, and I could put it over here, and I could put it over here, and I could put it over here. And we could say, maybe while the rabbit's walking, this thing is going to spin around it. Maybe that's just what it's going to do, right? Now, of course, you always want to copy the start and put it at the end. But then again, we don't necessarily care about that too much. So you can see here that now we have this bone that's orbiting around the rabbit. So the really odd thing is, what if we duplicate that with Control D, and now we have two of these orbiting around the rabbit, right? But let's make the top one a global sequence, and let's talk about what that would mean. So in order to make the top one a global sequence, first off, we have a little bit of a problem that if I just go in here and say global sequence create, we make a global sequence of length 1000, and I choose that in the time chooser, you'll notice there are no keyframes. And if I go and I try to drag this around, there are still no keyframes. So the reason for that is that global sequences are exclusive with normal like sequences of things. In other words, if I have a bone and it's translating around, it's either doing that in an animation or it's doing that in a global sequence, but it's not doing that in both, right? It cannot do that in both. That is not allowed. So as a workaround, what you can do is you can go back to walk, and you can go back to this, and you can just push delete, hit your arrow key here to just delete all the animation off of this box. And that'll make it stationary. So I have a stationary box and a moving box, right? And now what we want to do is try to animate the stationary box with a global sequence. And now it should be possible because it doesn't have animation data in a non-global sequence, which would lock it to be non-global. Unfortunately, due to an issue with my software, it looks like once we do that, it's not actually smart enough to clear the fact that it had non-global animation. So let's call this the box rabbit and save it. And we might be able to start modifying some things about this box rabbit. Notably, looks like it actually has inserted some kind of keyframe on this one. All right, well, that looks too complicated. So basically, once the node is already tagged as having animation data, my program seems to really struggle with tagging it as having nothing. So a really easy fix for this is we're just going to delete that bone and we're going to make a new one. And the new one, having had no data added to it yet, we can rest assured can be animated in a global sequence. And this is simply because, let's center that bone. This is simply because it doesn't have any animation yet. And let's not click it until we're inside of the global sequence down here. So you can see this, now the timeline doesn't really tell you, but we're not in 0 to 1000, we're in 0 to 1000 of the global sequence named 1000, which is significant because it's separate. And so now because it's separate, you'll notice also that the other box isn't moving at all. But I can go and I can move this box. And let's talk about how this is a little bit special, right? So it looks just the same. It's like I have a timeline and I'm just moving the box around, right? It seems just very exactly the same. So then you have the question, well, how is it different when it looks so much the same, right? To this point, all I'm doing is I'm moving a box around in time, and I've defined its motion. And you know, if you look at them in stand, they're very, very similar. But there's something to catch on to here that's really interesting, right? The two boxes are moving at a separate rate. And not only are they moving at a separate rate, they're actually animating totally independently. Like this 1000 in the global sequence that we just defined is repeating itself independent of the length of the walk animation. And this goes on that if we switch to like stand or death, the global sequence is always playing, always independent of that animation. Notice this box and where it is, right? And now, what if I change stand to walk? Suppose that this box is on the left. When I click walk, it's still on the left. And now I'm going to click stand while it's on, that was the left of the rabbit, I guess. Actually, it was the right. So now it's going to be on the actual left, the right of the rabbit. So right of the rabbit, I clicked stand, and it was still on the right of the rabbit. And now I'm going to click walk while it's on the right of the rabbit, right? So that's our left over there. And you can see that in doing this, it maintained that position. Its movement is totally independent of the rabbit's animations. It's just an indefinitely repeating animation sequence. And that's the way all the global sequences are. And they're just named by their length. That's the only naming information they have stored in the file. And so basically, I can make one that is like 5,000 or something like that, right? And if I go to this 5,000 one, and of course comes the question, what do we put inside of it? I guess maybe we could like draw another box or something like that up here and have this one spin, and we'll say this box is going to spin. Maybe it's going to spin really slowly. So if I select that, we do a rig and we center the bone, and I go back to the animation editor. If I say I'm going to go to global sequence of length 5,000, and I go to the rotate function up here, and we give it a little initial rotation of some sort, and then we just say maybe from the bottom view here, right? We just kind of make it spin around a bit until we get back to where we started, more or less. What you see as a result of that, oh, that's no fun. It gets here and then it goes back. Gets to there. We gotta make him get over there, so then he'll get like to over there. Okay, so basically now this box is spinning up here in the air, right? Now obviously I made it really quickly, so it's not spinning at a particularly constant rate, but you'll notice the rate that it spins is slower than the rabbit's jumping. Like this rabbit could jump 3 or 4 times in the times that it takes that box to spin. And this is pointing out how the spinning of that box is totally independent of the rabbit's animation. It's also totally independent of both of the boxes, even the global sequence box, because that's on a different global sequence. So you can notice like this upper box, maybe we get like 1 revolution every 3 or 4 cycles of the global sequence box, right? So the concept of these global sequences is that they're just endlessly repeating things that'll just repeat no matter what the model does. And you should see this same behavior if you were to save this model and put it into the game. You would observe pretty much exactly that same behavior. If you're interested, I guess I could go ahead and do that right now. But obviously, we're pretty sure we know what's going to happen. That if I go to the import manager and I go ahead and import just this box rabbit right here, and let's save this as a map named box rabbit. Let's see, maps, box rabbit. We go and get the rabbit. We make a new one, give it the box rabbit model. We will quickly see that the box rabbit is a rabbit regardless of whose animations. These floaty things are still happening up there. Meanwhile, the one that only animates on the rabbit's walk animation is a box that only animates strictly on the rabbit's walk animation. And it doesn't animate on walk variation 2, for example, because it's not on a global sequence. Only the upper box and the rotating box are on those global sequences.